on this episode of the WildFed podcast.
Studying this bird and understanding the biology of the bird is not like hunting this bird. Trying to mesh together my research experience and what I've learned as a scientist with what I've learned as a turkey hunter.
The story of the turkey on the landscape is so inextricable from the hunt because they were extirpated almost completely and then brought back in tandem with the hunt, essentially.
We are becoming quite efficient at killing this bird, and you should expect to see birds change the way they behave. They're trying to figure out a way to navigate around this risk.
What about this thing people talk about, a bird getting hung up? Is that really a thing?
I watched a bird fly the Mississippi River one day, and then I've called birds up to a barbed wire fence that was down on the ground, and he wouldn't step over it.
Our fall harvest was 2 birds, now it's 5. As a meat hunter, that's nice, but most people who work with turkeys are a little bit like, whoa, it's too much.
We have changed so much as hunters in the past few decades. What will turkey hunting look like in the next 10 years?
Episode 159 of the WildFed podcast, The Turkey Whisperer with Dr. Mike Chamberlain, is brought to you by Surthrival. Why just survive when you can thrive? Surthrival.com is your source for nature-based supplements that keep you thriving in our modern world. From hormone health to immune support, increased metabolism to exercise recovery, Surthrival keeps you thriving when others are merely surviving. Check out their Pine Pollen Pure Potency for testosterone support, colostrum for a smoothie ingredient that's 3 times more effective against flu than vaccines, elk antler for powerful growth and recovery, medicinal mushrooms for immunomodulation and powerful antioxidant capacity, and vitamin D3 for all the protective properties you heard about during the pandemic. Go to surthrival.com to see the entire lineup and use the coupon code WildFed for 5% off your order. Surthrival. Why just survive when you can thrive? Are you concerned about rising food prices and food security? Do you strive to be more self-reliant and live more sustainably? Learning to forage and grow your own mushrooms can help you take a leap forward in your food sovereignty. Mushrooms are nutritious, containing protein, vitamins, minerals, and a list of sophisticated medicinal benefits. And unlike other garden crops, you won't need a lot of space or time to grow an entire year's supply and save money on your grocery bills. You can even grow mushrooms in an urban environment, and if you know how to wild forage them safely and sustainably, you can get your supply freely off the landscape. Our friends at Wild Muskoka Botanicals have been growing and foraging mushrooms for over a decade and have put together a comprehensive online training. Avoid the most common mistakes when learning to grow edible and medicinal mushrooms. Learn the best techniques and species for your specific conditions and become more confident in your wild mushroom identification skills. They're currently offering WildFed listeners $30 off the course. Go to themushroomcourse.com. Again, it's themushroomcourse.com and enter WildFed 30 for $30 off and take a leap forward in your health, self-reliance, food security, and knowledge of mushrooms. I'm Daniel Vitalis, and you're listening to the WildFed podcast, a show about reconnecting with nature through hunting, fishing, foraging, and food. WildFed. Food is all around you. Before I introduce today's guest, I want to let you know I'll be joining the National Wild Turkey Federation this Friday, November 18th, for their Turkey Call All Access Live podcast in Lee, New Hampshire. I recently had Fred Bird, the host of Turkey Call, on the show, and I'm excited to connect with him in person for this event. You can register or get more details on the National Wild Turkey Federation's website. Just click on events and scroll down to November 18th. I'd love to connect with you in person, so if you can make it, come by and say hi. Now, speaking of turkeys, we're about to go deep. If you haven't been already, I'm thrilled to introduce you to Dr. Mike Chamberlain. Somehow over my years of making the show, I wasn't aware of this man or his incredible work on turkeys. Now I feel like I've been stumbling around in the dark. Okay, that's probably an overstatement since I've had some great mentors and we've had several excellent and very informed turkey hunters and biologists on the show over the years. But Mike seems to possess a meta-knowledge of these birds, seamlessly combining the science of their biology and ecology with the experience of a seasoned hunter. As a relatively new hunter myself, one who grew up with little of the ecological knowledge needed to be successful in the pursuit, I've relied heavily on my adult learning skills, and that's included finding mentors that can accelerate my learning curve. I started out in my mid-30s, which means I didn't get those crucial couple of decades of watching, listening, learning, and of course, making mistakes. At my age, being successful early on was pretty important if I was going to stick with it and feed myself off the landscape. Without that early life on-ramp to guide me through the typical hunter's journey, I had to rely on friends, books, videos, podcasts, and of course, the many mistakes made in the field as my main educational inputs. It's also meant getting occasionally waylaid by the hunter science. You know, those often repeated but ill-informed tropes that stick around in hunting camps, subtly leading us astray and speaking to the disconnect that often exists between the work of field biologists and the hunters that pursue the quarry. If I'd known about Mike's work several years ago, I would have relied heavily on it to inform my knowledge of the species and, of course, my hunting strategies. My goal with making the WildFed podcast, let me say that again. My goal with making the WildFed podcast has been to curate voices from around the world of hunting, fishing, foraging, and wild food cooking in order to make the road a little easier and the education more concise for those who, like me, are embarking on this journey later in life or in a non-traditional way. So in that sense, Mike represents just the kind of guest I'm looking for. Someone who can rapidly accelerate what you understand about a specific species to make up for the lack of ecological place-based knowledge many of us suffer from as a result of being raised in a nature-divorced culture. We need Mike Chamberlains for every species. Folks that can guide our learning, distilling the scientific knowledge into simple to absorb, useful lessons that help to deepen our connection to our wildlife neighbors. So if you love wild turkeys, and in particular, if you love or hope to love hunting them, here is an authoritative voice on the topic. Just talking to him has me very excited about next spring. Mike Chamberlain, welcome to the show.
It's good to be here, man.
Yeah, man. I feel like I'm pretty late to the party. You know, I been on your Instagram all morning reading through your Turkey Tuesdays. Fred Bird from National Wild Turkey Federation was telling me about you recently, and I'm getting on here realizing, oh, you're the guy. I had no idea. So I'm really glad to have you on here, man.
Yeah, it's good to be with you.
Tell me a little bit about what you do, what your background is, and what you do.
Yeah, so I'm a wildlife researcher. I grew up as a suburban kid and went to college and got degrees in wildlife science and biology, and was fortunate enough to be able to go to graduate school and get some advanced degrees, and ended up getting my doctorate. And I've actually I've been a researcher for over 20 years now. I think I'm in my 27th year. Wow. I think now. So I've been doing this a long time.
You seem to have quite a focus and specialty in the area of the wild turkey, though.
I do. Yeah. I kind of fell into that opportunity, really. When I went to graduate school, I was offered the chance to work on several different research projects, and the one that I chose was one that was focusing on turkeys. And I mean, I grew up as a turkey hunter, so I was passionate about the bird, but I really kind of realized once I started working with them in the field that they're just a fascinating species, and it kind of went from there. I did my doctoral research partially on turkeys, and as soon as I graduated with my PhD, I got an academic position at Louisiana State University, and was able to start studying turkeys like right out of the box. So wow. Basically have been studying turkeys ever since 1993 through today.
You know, as somebody who came to hunting a lot later in life, and it was turkeys were my sort of inroad into hunting, I was the type of person, I did a lot of like adult education type learning, like I'd come at a new topic and I'd just go find, if I had to find an idiot's guide or whatever, I'd start there and I'd start reading and learning. And when I came into hunting, it was like, oh, this is a different world, because not everything's written down.
Yeah.
Most of the hunting books tend to be memoir type books, hunting stories. And then occasionally you find books, they're not always that well written. There's not that many published. And so turkeys were this thing where, I picked up a lot from locals, but there's not a lot of books. And now I'm realizing, so just a shameless plug for your Instagram, because you do these Tuesday, write these little chapters on turkeys each Tuesday. I just want to send folks there, Wild turkey doc, DOC. Man, you've got a lot there. So I'm very excited to find this kind of an educational resource to point people towards. First thoughts on that? Curious why you, because as a PhD, obviously you're familiar with the writing process. Why do you think we see so little how to kind of technical? Is it just the sort of patrilineal passing on of hunting, or why do you think it's not so well cataloged the way so many other activities and topics are?
I honestly don't know. Part of me thinks, you know, as a hunter, when you spend time around other passionate hunters, there are always exceptions, but the best hunters I've ever been around, you'd never know that they were that good of a hunter.
Mm-hmm.
They're very unassuming, and they go about their business, and they have such a passion for the sport, but they also have such tremendous respect for the animals that they are pursuing, that I think in a lot of ways there's no motivation to write it down. It's something that and I'm speaking a bit personally here. It's something that you kind of cherish yourself. And
Yeah.
um, I have actually started writing a book about turkey hunting and turkey, kind of trying to mesh together my research experience and what I've learned as a scientist with what I've learned as a turkey hunter, because
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of ways I see some similarities, but in many other ways I've learned things, hunting birds that you never can learn studying them. and
Yeah. Yeah.
and so I think there's something to that. It's such a part of your being that writing it down isn't something that's high on, on your radar screen. And yeah, obviously there are exceptions. I mean, there are memoirs out there that people have written that are just superb, that cover their experiences in the field, and what they've learned as turkey hunters, and they're sharing that information. But I personally, I know, and I know you do too. I know some turkey hunters that are really, really accomplished, really good turkey hunters, that they would not write down their experiences because they
Yeah.
feel so, it's theirs.
Yeah.
It's theirs. It's not anyone else's. These are things I lived, and I hold them close to my heart, type of thing. And I see some value in that.
Me too. Me too. And it's like a personal transmission that happens, I think, from, hunter to whoever the mentee is. So you can imagine a lot of that's just sort of verbally passed on in the form of storytelling and stuff too. But I've also noticed that a lot of times turkey biologists, when they set out to start hunting, don't, you'd think they'd have a tremendous advantage, but it doesn't seem like they always do. Have you seen that too?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
What do
You
you
know,
think that's
I,
about?
I've been asked this before, and it's really true. Studying this bird and understanding the biology of the bird is not like hunting this bird. It helps, and that's one of the reasons that I post some of the information that I do. Is I want people to be as fascinated with the bird and its ecology, its behavior, as I am. And I also want people to see that this bird and how it behaves is much more complex than maybe you'd think. And I think that if you do that, you become a better turkey hunter, because you can kind of process, and as things happen to you, you reflect back on, oh, okay, well, maybe this is what's going on, or maybe that's what's going on. Because I do that. I'll get my butt kicked by a bird, and I'll go, you know what he just did to me? He did what bird 6 did in 2005, that we had a that we had a transmitter on. I mean, I see some of the same things playing out when I hunt that I see when I'm, yeah, as a researcher. But very few people get to see that, other than me and my students and other people that do what I do for a living. So I almost feel, I don't know if obligated is the right word, but I really am passionate about sharing that information with people that are interested in it, because I think it resonates with people. If you can see it on the screen, you can think about it, you can read about it, then you reflect back on your own times in the
Mm-hmm.
field chasing the bird, and you go, ah, you get a light bulb moment. And
Right.
maybe there's only one of those from reading 100 posts. Maybe there's only one
Yeah.
light bulb moment, but if there is that one, then it was worth me going to the effort to do that.
Hey, well, you've definitely cataloged some. I'm very excited to go through your archive of posts. I would like to talk a little bit more about those sort of differences and the discrepancies between the two worldviews, the scientific worldview and then the worldview of the on the ground hunter. Because one thing that occurs to me, scientifically, we really try to avoid anthropomorphizing anything,
Hmm.
So, but as a hunter, you're constantly going, oh, you know what he's doing? He's doing this. Oh, he's all ranged up. He's looking for that. We start to project. I start to think about a turkey like some kind of like young, horny dude at a bar, you know? And I
Yeah.
start like projecting this human behavior of what I remember myself to be like as like a young man, sort of out there on the chase or whatever. And, you project all that out there. And then before you know it, you're treating him like he's this dude. And it's such an anti-scientific perspective. Um,
Hmm.
so I'm kind of curious about that dichotomy. And do you find yourself doing that too? Do you relate to that? And then, how do you as a scientist view the bird? Almost like, I guess maybe like give us a little bit of a briefing on the bird from like if you were talking to a scientist versus you're talking to another hunter, because it's like a really different way of thinking about and communicating about it. Huh?
Yeah, I mean, I do that as a hunter. I still, to this day, start playing mind games with myself. This is, he's trying to pull a back door on your, and then I have to step back and think, in reality, what he's doing is he's trying to survive, and
Mm-hmm.
turkeys are wired to do two things. They're wired to reproduce and survive. That's what males are doing. And reproducing comes at a cost if you're dead. So if you think about it just literally, these things that this bird does to us, they're not really doing it to us. They're trying to live. They're
Mm-hmm.
trying to avoid risky behaviors. They're trying to navigate this complicated landscape where we're not the only danger that's out there for them. So I try to step back and think about it like that. That okay, I'm, he's not doing this to me. He's reacting to the things that I've put into his environment, and he's trying to figure out a way to make it through the day, while also potentially being able to breed with a hen. And when we look at some of the things that these birds do from a science perspective, they make sense. I mean, there is a very tangible behavior that this bird goes through. I mean, we see. I was just talking about this with a student the other day. We don't really see any average turkeys anymore. We as scientists we like to talk about averages. The average was this, or the mean was that, and the variance was this. And in reality, when you look at behavior, there's no such thing as a mean or an average. There's just a lot of different individual birds out there, and how one is going to respond cannot be predicted at all based on the
Wow.
response of the previous or the subsequent one.
That's interesting because they're so short lived. Like if I imagine a black bear, who's got the potential to live, a couple decades or something, and I can see him developing all these idiosyncratic personality quirks. But for such a short-lived bird, it's interesting that they would be such individuals like that.
Yeah, and up until recently, we really haven't had the technology to track these birds long term through a number of years and collect really really fine scale behavioral data. And now we do. We're using GPS transmitters that survive multiple spring breeding seasons, and so now,
Oh, they'll wear them through multiple years.
yes, yes.
Because even 2-3 years ago up here, I was watching our resident biologist working with telemetry still, which I was kind of surprised was still being employed.
There, some folks are still using just standard
Right.
VHF, to go track the bird
But that's what you were saying.
stuff.
With that technology, it's a lot less finer resolution.
Yeah, for sure. And there's a lot of bias and error associated with the locations, but with the GPS telemetry that we now have, we know this bird's location within about 10 yards of where, that's about the air on it. So it's
Right.
pretty accurate, and we're getting tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of locations at a time, and we can do that through a number of years now. So for instance, we can catch a bird that's a jake and get to see how he changes from being a juvenile to becoming an adult, and vice versa. We can mark these birds that are presumably 2 years old based on what we see about them, and see them experience and survive multiple hunting seasons, and I predict that we're going to see that these birds change as they age. They become different, they behave differently, and
Hmm.
they develop these personalities, if you will. And there's other research showing this on species that are, not turkeys, that these animals develop these behaviors, these personalities, if you will, that allow them to get through risk. And I suspect what we're going to see with turkeys is, as they get older and older, they get a really defined, really specific set of behaviors that allows them to work around us. Whereas, say, a 2 year old, today he is a goofball and he survives. So tomorrow he runs right up to the first call and he gets shot. Well, he's done. Versus a 2 year old that maybe makes some appropriate decisions, works his way through that first hunting season, gains experience, and then realizes the following spring, when this activity starts again, okay, here's how I need to behave. It worked for
Mm,
me last year. They're not thinking that literally. They're just, again, they're trying to survive,
right.
and they're doing the things that allow them to survive the day and move on to the next.
Well, so that's at the individual level. I wanted to ask you, is there something population wide? I read an article, I remember a couple of years ago, it was talking about, I was looking at fish, and they were talking about the impacts of fishing and how fish that are quick to chase lures get caught. Therefore, they die more often. Therefore, fish less likely to chase after anything end up breeding more. And over time, they were saying over time, tactics have to change because you
Hmm.
actually start to change the population.
Hmm.
Are turkeys changing in response to all these people in the woods? I've noticed even in the last couple of years, a lot less gobbling and a lot less response to calls. And I've taken to using gobble calls a lot more than
Hmm.
when I first started hunting. Is that just like a anecdotal thing I'm experiencing, or is it possible that this amount of hunting pressure we see from the popularity of turkey hunting could actually cause population wide changes in behavior too?
Yes, is the short answer. For sure. This is a topic that's really being fleshed out in the research world right now, and my lab has published some work on this topic, specifically to gobbling activity, showing that what happens when intensive hunting starts. These populations that are heavily hunted, think public areas, tons of pressure. What happens is you see these dramatic declines in gobbling, to the point where gobbling almost ceases,
Wow.
but all the birds weren't killed. So in other words, it's not just we're killing all the birds that are vocal, it's that the other birds are changing their behavior. And it makes you wonder at a broader scale whether we're selecting against vocal birds. In other words,
Right.
if we're disproportionately targeting and killing birds that are more vocal, are is there a chance that we could be altering the behaviors through generations? And to your point, yeah, there's other research showing that possibility exists in species where aggressive behavior can cause you to be disproportionately, quote unquote, sampled, whether it's catching a bass or
Right.
killing a turkey. It is something interesting to think about, because if that's occurring, it's going to take some time for it to flesh itself out. But if that is what we're doing, and I think there's a strong possibility there is, then through time, as if we continue with this really, popular practice, you should expect to see birds become more quiet or change the way they behave as hunting starts, because they're trying to figure out a way to navigate around, this risk, if you will. And if not gobbling allows them to do that, then they're going to have to do something else to secure breeding opportunities. And so if they're not going to gobble to hens, they're going to have to do something else. And if that's what we're studying, we're trying to figure out, well, what are they doing?
Well,
Are they moving more?
Right.
Are they just shutting up and going to places that hens are at? What are they doing? And that's one of the things we're studying now, is trying to understand, well, if they're not gobbling, then what are they doing?
Wow, it's fascinating, because then you imagine too the hunters who maybe reaping is becoming more popular, gobble calling, things like that play on a different aspect of the psychology, so as to still achieve success, adaptations by the hunters. And I guess I wanted to ask this question too. Is there really when I think about the wild turkey in the United States as it exists today, it seems to me that the story of the turkey on the landscape is so inextricable from the hunt, in a way like is different than a lot of other species, right? Because they were extirpated almost completely and then brought back in tandem with the hunt, essentially, right? Is that fair to say? And so at this point, turkeys on the landscape and the turkey hunt, they're wound together in a way it's a little bit different than most of the other species we hunt. Do you think that's fair to say?
I do. I completely agree that they're piece and parcel linked to each other, for sure.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah, and turkey hunting has just, you mentioned, fanning and reaping and these other tech. I mean, there are many. I mean, if you just look at all the gadgets and tools that we have generated through time, but particularly within the past decade, to try to be more successful, we're becoming, and when I say we, I say just turkey hunters in general, we are becoming quite efficient, at killing this bird. And that, that's asking for the bird to adjust to this rapid kind of evolution of techniques, and that's a tough sell for you're asking a species to react to something in a very short time window.
Right. Okay.
40 or 50 years from now, are these birds going to behave the same as they do now? Probably not. I mean, I can just, from my own experience, from screwing up and and educating some birds that I felt certain, okay, I'm hunting the same bird that I was hunting last week, or what, the learning curve can be quite short for these, for certain individuals. They pick it up pretty quick. But it's interesting to think, what will turkey hunting look like in the next 10 years or the next 20 years? It's hard to predict. If you just look based on the last 10 years, wow. I mean, it could be dramatically different. We've changed.
We'll get right back to the show in a moment, but first, I've got some good news about the WildFed TV show. You can now stream both seasons 1 and 2 on demand at myoutdoortv.com. That's myoutdoortv.com. My Outdoor TV is Outdoor Channel's premium online subscription service. They host thousands of episodes of hunting and fishing content, making this a great subscription service for anyone interested in the outdoors. But if you just want to see WildFed, grab yourself a free trial subscription and then check out all 20 episodes at no charge at all. If you decide to keep it, it's just $9.99 a month. We're currently in production for season 3 of WildFed, which should start airing around the beginning of 2023. Hey, thanks again for all your incredible support. If you haven't already, I can't wait for you to see the show. Wow, it's really interesting to think about. I'm curious, like sort of how much, like what have you seen a lot of changes since when you first started turkey hunting to today? I mean, or is it largely just a matter of how much involvement there is with hunters? Because what you just said before reminds me almost of how we talk about within, like, let's say a new deleterious invasive exotic species, like maybe, you think about how the reefs in Florida are having to, quickly respond to the presence of lionfish suddenly as a new
Hmm.
predator there.
Hmm.
So similarly, turkey populations have to deal with us almost like an exotic or something, like we're this extremely efficient predator suddenly on their population. And these aren't the speeds that biology tends to adapt at, right? So have you seen tremendous changes over the decades?
Oh my gosh, it's crazy. Yeah, I can remember as a high school kid going spring turkey hunting and then going to class. And I can remember going fall turkey hunting and going to class. And we'd get up and we would go make a see if we heard a bird gobble in the tree, and if we did, then we may miss first period, and if we didn't, we were usually there on time. And
Were you
I
bringing
can
your
just
shotgun to school? Or
oh
keep it in
yeah,
the car? Yeah,
oh yeah,
it's so
yeah.
wild, right?
I'm showing my age. But yeah, I mean, we just left it in the back seat, or
Yeah.
it didn't matter. Nobody cared then. But I can distinctly remember going into class wearing mismatched camouflage. That's what I had. I mean, my
Yeah.
my parents didn't know, we didn't have much, and I wore whatever my dad gave me, if it was a hand me down or army fatigues or whatever. And if we didn't hear a bird, or if we did hear a bird and we weren't successful right out of the box, you know what? We hopped in the car and left and went to school. And then I can remember as a young adult doing the same thing, and there were birds that were just untouchable. There were just some birds that were just untouchable. You just could
Hmm.
not kill those birds. And now I look at all the things, and I'm guilty of it. I do this. I do. Hey, let me pull my phone out and figure out exactly where that bird is. So I'm gonna
Right.
pull up OnX or some other mapping feature or something. I'm not endorsing them. I'm just saying, hey, let me figure out where he's at, or where could he be going. Oh, I wasn't aware that was over there, or where is that property line, so I can figure out exactly where I'm at. And you know, the camouflage is so effective now. It's advanced so far. Shot technology, the guns that we're using. I used to go turkey hunting with a single shot 12 gauge Harrington and Richardson,
Yeah.
hammerlock. I mean, that's what I used. And
Right.
and
And I'm sure the quality of ammunition was so different then, I bet.
I shot 2 3/4 inch sixes. It was squirrel loads. I mean, that's kind of what we shot for
Yeah. Right.
turkeys. And we called the bird up 20 yards or 25 yards, and if they were at 40, you didn't shoot. And now I shoot loads at 40. I'm entirely comfortable. I mean, that's a dead bird. And the calls and just everything, the decoys. I can remember the first decoy that I ever used was one of those that you folded up, and it was like a little styrofoam thing. You'd fold it up and stick it in your vest, and it looked hideous. It
Yeah, they're
didn't even look like,
terrible. I think I know the
yeah,
ones you're talking about. They're
it didn't
awful.
even look like a turkey. And
Almost like it's
and
made out of what those like circus peanut, those orange circus
yeah, it's
peanut
like
foam
the
candy are
hat,
made of.
the hats that you put on.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I never called a bird up to that decoy. And I think back now, and I know why, because no turkey would have looked at that decoy and thought, "There's a hen." I mean, it
Yeah.
looked
Right.
hideous.
Right.
And now, I look in my back seat sometimes, and in fact, just the other day, I was going through my hunting clothes closet, and I was moving stuff around, and there was a hen decoy that was in a bag, and it kind of fell out of the bag, and I picked it up to stick it back in there, and I remember looking at it thinking, that's super realistic. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
beautiful decoy, and we have changed so much as hunters
Wow.
in the past few decades.
That's really insightful. Yeah, I'm wondering. Well, when I look at some of the modern decoys I have today, I mean, I've watched. I'm sure you've seen the same thing many times. I'll watch a hen attack one of my decoys for a half an hour. Just
Yeah.
pecking at it and scratching at it. Like even though it's just spinning in circles, she's convinced now. So unlike these decoys you talked about in the past, I mean, they're compelling. And also, they have that iridescence in the paint that,
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
that's one thing I actually am kind of curious about, with the eyes of a turkey. I assume that when I see that iridescence in a turkey, that they must be seeing that more than I am. I mean, that must be one of the ways that they visually communicate with each other is through, I mean, because I can't
Yes.
imagine why you'd have all that iridescence for no reason. So, so that is part of it because like I see that in the paint and when the light hits that just right, it seems like they can't understand that this is not an actual turkey sometimes.
Yeah, the iridescence is actually, it's serving a couple of purposes. One, it's just sexual selection. It's, iridescence is, it looks sexy to the eye, and
Birds love it, huh?
he's trying to attract attention. But there's also been research showing that birds that are more iridescent are better fit. They're fitter birds.
Oh,
Um, they have less parasite loads. They're better, if you will. So from this bird's perspective, looking a hen looking at a couple of toms strutting together and really scrutinizing that iridescence, that's a way for her to get a metric for how fit he is and
interesting.
whether he's the best tom, if you will, that she can breed with. So yeah, and iridescence, if, that's part of the whole kind of crave around the paint that you see on decoys. If you look at, just take a fan, for instance, and hold it out in the sun and turn it. Not only do you see the fan turning, but you see the iridescence changing. You see
Purple and green.
and that's something that in their mind, they're geared towards seeing that, and that's part of the way they communicate with each other. So it seems logical that if they'd see that, if when they see that, they would react to it in
Mhm.
many instances, which is what you just noted.
So sometimes we see, I think fisheries are a good example. It's like, once our technology got to a certain point, we have to like find ways to really start to limit ourselves back because we're so efficient. Do you think we need to change our approach? How do we handle this level of efficiency? And also, so many of us are so excited to bring new people in. There's always this concern about hunter numbers being low and that having an impact on our conservation dollars. So, if we're going to continue to get more efficient and our techniques are going to get better and better, how do we handle the future? And I keep hearing murmurings of decline in population. So, where do we sit with all of that?
Yeah, I think probably what you'll see is what you're seeing in a lot of states right now is, you know, agencies realize that there have been declines in many areas, not all, but in many areas, and they're making changes in the face of those declines while still trying to allow us opportunities. So I think probably what you're going to see is a continuation of what you're seeing the past few years, which is agencies trying to come up with regulations, frameworks that allow us to go out there and hunt and enjoy ourselves and be successful while trying to kind of minimize the impact on the resource. The changes you've seen lately, some states have banned the use of decoys. Some in
Wow.
certain
Okay.
some states have opened the seasons later, to try to reduce mortality of adult toms, early in the breeding season. Some states have just reduced bag limits so that individual hunters can take fewer birds, and some states have done a lot, all of that. They've made a number of changes, and I think you'll probably continue to see that because of what you just said. That the agencies realize that there's a lot of turkey hunters out there, and we're passionate, we're interested, and we want to recruit people. We want others to experience what we cherish, and we also want sustainable populations of birds so that we can continue to do this, in decades to come. And that just requires some creative kind of management solutions, and that's what you're seeing agencies grapple with right now. And one of the big research unknowns is we don't really know what effect these tools have. Like, I get asked this and people get really upset with me when I kind of hedge my statements. But somebody say, well, I know that the fanning is increasing harvest by X%, and I just have to say, well, I don't, because I don't have the data to
Uh-huh.
show that. And in the absence of those data, you're asking agencies to make changes that they without data, and that's a tough sell. So I think the technology and the techniques, those are tough things to get answers about. So in the absence of those answers, and what I mean by that is, okay, what effect is this having? So for instance, what effect is the use of fanning or reaping having, or what effect is the use of male decoys or female decoys, or you pick a topic, whatever it is. What is the effect of that? And if we don't have answers to that, which we don't in a lot of cases, then the agencies are going to err on the side of, okay, well, we don't know the answer to that, but one thing we can do to kind of get to reduce harvest is we can change the season, we can reduce bag limits, we can do these things. So that's kind of what you're seeing.
Wow. Okay, so basically it's either we alter the tools, but in order to do that effectively, we need to understand the tools better than we do, or we just have to regulate, we have to change the season or bag limits. I mean, I would definitely like to see my tools hindered over the season or my harvest rate, I mean,
Mm-hmm. And I
personally.
think a lot, yeah, and you hear a lot. I see positive and negative. I see, I get contacted by people, and some they will say the same thing you just said. You know what? Take the decoys, take this, take that. Well, I just want to hunt.
Mm,
And then you'll see other people that disagree with that. They have a different mindset,
yeah.
and that puts agencies in a real challenging situation, because we as turkey hunters we all have different perspectives. We all do things slightly different. We think a little differently. That's, we're human beings, but at the end of the day, I would argue that every turkey hunter wants the same thing. We want to be able to hunt turkeys, and we want to be able to do that in the future like we're doing it today. And for that to happen, we're going to have to be willing to give a little bit, and that's what the agency, I mean, that's what state agencies grapple with all the time, is how do they keep us happy while ensuring sustainability of whatever critter it is, whether it's turkeys or deer or fish or whatever it is. And it's a real balance between opportunity and, you know, and you also have to look at it from the standpoint of, there is a huge industry around turkey hunting.
I was going to say there's interests that are financial here too.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I can remember going to the National Wild Turkeys Federation's convention back in like the early 2000s. And I go every year. And I can remember the exhibit hall back, years ago. And then you go in the exhibit hall now and you see how many call makers and how, shot companies, and the camouflage technology is unbelievable, and the decoy manufacturers, and you just walk through there, and I think back to when I used to walk through that exhibit hall 20 years ago, and I think, wow, this is
Yeah.
there's a huge industry that's centered around the harvest, the chase of this bird, and there's a lot of people that are passionate about it, from a kind of a visceral, personal standpoint. And yeah, I've said this before, and I'll maintain this until I die. Turkey hunters are the most visceral. They're the most literal, cerebral hunters that are out there, and
Mm,
that's my opinion. Turkey hunters get really. It's a one-on-one game.
yeah. Yeah.
They think critically about what they're doing.
I mean, you're having a conversation with the bird.
Yeah, yeah, you're directly engaged with this animal, unless you just get lucky, and it gets quote unquote personal. You
Mm.
and there's just something different about it compared to other hunting, I think. And the turkey hunters that I've met that are really, really good turkey hunters, it's something they think about all the time. It's not a spring activity. They think about it all the time.
Yeah.
And they're really cerebral about it. They think critically through their experiences and each day and each hunt. And I'm not saying other hunters don't do that. I'm just saying that as a group, they're the most kind of thoughtful, cerebral bunch I've been around.
Do we have is the data clear at this point about these declines that are happening, and where are they happening, and do we know, is this hunting pressure, or is this other impacts? I guess, and one other piece I'll tack onto that is, did we go past carrying capacity in our incredible conservation efforts, and now we're just coming back down to it, and we call that a decline, or is this really a decline?
I think it's a little bit of all of that. Yes, the landscape is not capable of supporting the number of birds it did 20 years ago, and it never will be, because if you look at the landscape now and project out 50 years from now, there's going to be less habitat available for
Yeah,
turkeys.
more
And
stuff.
yeah, and that's just reality. So yes, we probably, and the data pretty clearly show this, that we very likely overshot carrying capacity by a little bit, which you would expect in populations that are restored. You would expect them to kind of overshoot carrying capacity a little bit and then kind of oscillate around that carrying capacity. But the problem is with turkeys is we've now dropped that carrying capacity lower than we want it to be. So these declines that we've seen, they are real, and they're primarily being driven by reductions in production. We're not making as many turkeys as we did 20 years ago. And um, so what you see is that there's been this gradual decline through time. It hasn't been this dramatic, they're gone. It's been this, each year it gets a little lower, a little lower, a little lower, because we're just not making the number of birds that we did. And at the same time, you've seen in many areas harvest that kind of stayed the same or increased. So we're actually, harvesting more animals from a lower population, and it only takes a certain amount of time for those numbers not to add up.
So you start
So
to get that additive mortality over
yeah,
time.
and we've, the science has been pretty clear, with few exceptions. Spring harvest is an additive mortality source. If you don't, and this is hotly debated by some in the turkey world, but um, this notion that if you don't kill this bird, they're going to die anyway is nonsense. I mean, we routinely have birds that are banded, that are being shot as 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds.
Wow.
This notion
Okay,
that if you
6 years
don't
old.
kill them, yeah, if you don't kill them by 3, they're dead is it's good. It's nonsense.
Okay.
So what we've seen is, if you're not making as many birds and you're harvesting the same number of birds, then you're taking a greater percentage of the population. That's just kind of the way that math adds up. And at some point, that the numbers have to break down and harvest has to decline. And that's what you see in a lot of states. I live here in Georgia, and the harvest here has declined dramatically in the past decade. And you'd expect it to. If you're not making as many birds, then you're not going to be able to harvest as many birds. So, that's something real that's ongoing, in these declines. And then there are all these other issues that factor into this, some of which we understand and some of which we don't. For instance, turkeys are pretty unique in that we harvest them during their breeding season. So not only it's not just a numbers game with turkeys like it may be for some species, meaning as long as you don't kill, over this percentage, you're fine. Well, with turkeys, we're mostly harvesting them when they're breeding. So you have to think that at some level that has an impact. And we've known it does, that the timing matters, when you kill the birds matters, what percentage you kill matters. So that creates a little more complication for agencies with turkeys because we are harvesting them when they, during their breeding season. And then you tack on all these other things that we don't understand. I mean, we're getting there, but like disease occurrence and, are there some of these diseases out there that are more impactful than we've thought? Maybe these diseases are having these subtle effects on populations that don't pop out from one year to the next. Maybe part of the reason that we're not making as many birds is maybe these diseases are impacting reproduction. We don't know. There's just so many factors influencing turkey populations that it gets complex to kind of wrap your head around.
Do you think the agencies are responsive enough to here in Maine, we just 2 years ago, they bumped our fall harvest was 2 birds. Now it's 5 per
Mm-hmm.
person, which seems everyone I've spoken to, I mean, as a meat hunter, that's nice, but most people I talk to who work with turkeys are a little bit like, whoa, it's too much. But I also have watched as the state of Maine has become increasingly interested in this sort of boom around hunting that's happening and the change in demographics. And I see them hustling to bring in new hunters. And obviously they've got some kind of fiduciary responsibility to do that. But at the same time, they've tasked with managing these populations. And so, I imagine there's a bit of a push and pull in the agencies like, hey, we need to bring in customers and those customers need to be satisfied. But we also have to keep them from being too satisfied or else we start to dig into the population. So, do you feel the agencies are doing a great job? Is it that it's regional where we're losing birds?
Oh, it seems to be much more pronounced in the South and East. Um, you know, what's interesting, the dichotomy you just mentioned is if you look right now in the Southeast U.S., the Midwest, basically take everything from say South Carolina over to Louisiana, go up through Arkansas, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma. You go and you look at what has occurred in these states in the past handful of years, and you see bag limit reductions, you see season changes, you're seeing a lot of concern about populations declining, and then you flip right around and go up to the Northeast, and you see situations like what you just mentioned, where there are agencies that are realizing that there's a resource there that people pursue, and they want to provide as much opportunity as they can and generate as much revenue as they can, as long as that doesn't undermine the resource. And you know, it is interesting because it begs the question, well, should the Northeast just wait and see how, will they be in the same situation as the
Right,
Southeast
right.
is in? And I wonder, a friend of mine who's an agency biologist has said this in meetings before, and I think it's pretty interesting. He's like, if you don't see an issue now, just wait. You will. It may be
Mm.
5 years from now, 10 years from now, but I have to, I have to wonder whether, because I'm guilty of this personally. I'm guilty of this. If you take my opportunity from here, I'm going to go hunt somewhere else.
Yeah, right.
And I don't feel bad about saying that. That's if I can't hunt here, or I don't feel like I can be successful or as successful here, I'll go somewhere else. And if I can, if I can make it work, I'll go to Texas and hunt for a couple of days, or I'll go, to Maine, like you said, and hunt for a few days. And that's just, and a lot of turkey hunters are like that. There's a lot of me's out there that are like, okay, well,
Mm.
I'll hunt here and then I'll go hunt over there. And, I think you're going to see, I think some of these agencies are going to realize that they shouldn't just super liberalize regulations. But then again, you know, if you said the fall bag limit's 5, if the average person kills one, and it really didn't matter that they liberalized the season, that total harvest rate really doesn't change,
Yeah.
meaning the percentage of the population that's removed doesn't change, then it didn't matter.
Right.
So, I just
I think the fall's a pretty low participation out here, so it probably isn't
mhm,
having a huge impact yet.
yeah, yeah. And what's funny is, you go other parts of the bird's range and you're seeing agencies that are reducing fall. They're trying to reduce fall opportunity because they don't want birds harvested in the fall. And it's when you try to summarize what's going on for turkeys across the species range, it's hard to do that
Yeah.
because it's just so variable from one place to the other.
I was wondering about, you had said a little while ago, you were talking about that sort of idea that if you don't kill him, he's going to die anyway. A 3-year-old bird's an old bird. Are there some other misconceptions like that are commonly held by turkey hunters that we could kind of set the record straight on, or just things that you wish turkey hunters understood better? Because, like there's that saying, we have bro science. It's kind of like that. We have like hunter science. A lot of times these things you just eventually find out aren't true, but, take for granted for a while.
I think one of the biggies that always comes up every spring is just spur length. That's one of the aging turkeys. That's one of the things that just pops up every year. People get really passionate about it, and the science shows pretty clearly that you can't look at a bird's spur and definitively say he's that old. It just doesn't work like that, and that's one that I get asked about every year, and people get really mad. I've had people really get angry that I know that bird was 3 years. Okay, I'm not arguing with you. I'm just saying that you can't look down on the ground at that leg and say that's a 4-year-old or that's a 3-year-old. You just can't. Now, are you more likely to be correct in saying that he has a 3/4 inch spur? He's probably 2. Yes, you're more likely to be correct. But I couch it like this to people: if you went into a doctor's office and you said, "Doc, what's the deal here?" and the doctor said, "I'm 60% positive you're going to make it," would you walk out of there and go, "Yep, I feel pretty good about that. I feel confident in that 60%." I would not.
Right.
So, if the doctor said I'm 75% confident that I'm right, I would be, when he or she walked out of the room, I'd be like, "What the hell?" That means 25% he or she could be wrong, and
Right.
that's the way spur length is.
Is it a nutrition factor? It's a genetics factor. What determines that? If it's
All
not
sorts
age?
of things.
Yeah.
Spur length can be highly variable from one part of the landscape to the next.
Yeah.
You see these pockets of areas where birds, just the population in general, has much longer spurs than in other
Yeah.
areas. The subspecies have different, issues with spur length. Yeah, and just individual variation, genetic variation. There's so much that goes into it, and yeah, that's one of the misconceptions I get most. Um,
What
yeah,
about this thing when people talk about a bird getting hung up? Because I'll have people be like, "Oh, he won't cross that brook," and it's like, man, I could just step right over that brook. Other times I see him fly over a river. It's like, so people will be like, "Oh, he won't cross that rock wall. He's hung up." Is that really a thing? Now that we have the GPS data, we can see what they're doing.
oh yeah, yeah. Uh, you know, Sometimes I think we think too deeply about this, about why did he do that. We've seen instances, to your point. I watched a bird fly the Mississippi River one day. I mean, he pitched out of Mississippi and landed in Arkansas, and and then I've called birds up to a barbed wire fence that was down on the ground, and he wouldn't step over it.
Yeah.
And I can never forget this. I was in Nebraska. No, I was in Kansas when this happened, and there's a 2-strand barbed wire fence. He would actually jump up onto the fence post and strut and drum and gobble, but he would not jump on my side of the fence. And one of my buddies was in the truck watching this happen. I couldn't see the bird. And he would text me and say, he's on the fence post facing you. I'm like, I can't see him. I can just hear him. He's right on top of me. He's like, okay, he just jumped back down in the field that he's in. And a few minutes later, he texts me and say, he's back on the fence post again. Call. And I'm like, I'm calling. He's gobbling his head off. He would not. He'd jump on the fence, but he wouldn't cross it. Why do they do that? Who knows, man? They just sometimes they do weird things. They'll go to extremes to cross some things, and then others are a barrier. And that's one thing I have a student that's really interested in this, and she wants to do some of her dissertation work on this. Is what is a barrier to a turkey?
Right.
Like, what actually constitutes a barrier? And we have millions of GPS locations at this point on, well over 1,000 Easterns that we have data on. And I want her to do that work, and she's going to. What is a barrier?
Right.
Is it a change in habitat? Is it a road? Is it a power line? Or among all the things that influence a turkey moving, are some more impactful than others? And I'll be interested to see what she finds, because I predict we're going to end up seeing that there are some things that turkeys perceive as a barrier that you and I would look at and go, that's not a barrier.
Right.
They just look at their environment differently.
It's hard to know too, like individually, what a bird's experienced. I mean, he's jumped over a fence and there's a fox standing there, and he's like, I'll never do that again. Or, he gets shot at but not killed and educated like that, or something. I mean, it's hard to know individually what a bird's history is and why he's responding a specific way too, right? Like it's that survival thing you were talking about before, because they're dealing with threats from every single direction. I was really interested in reading your post this morning about horned owls and just the avian predatory threat, which I hadn't really thought much about for especially adult birds. I just hadn't really occurred to me. But they're not only dealing with like a 360, but they're dealing with like 180 overhead too. They got to think about.
For sure. Right? Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, adults, I think we as people tend to think of like mammals, stuff that would eat a turkey, like that has teeth and, but turkeys have to deal with aerial predators, some of which are extremely efficient. And, two in particular that stick out for adults would be golden eagles and great horned owls. You've got two birds of prey there that are really good at their jobs. And, golden eagles will attack from great heights. They hit their prey with an amazing force.
I bet.
And then you have horned owls who are primarily nocturnal predators, and they, owls they're slick, they're quiet, and the turkeys that we lose to owls in almost every situation is they're killed in the at the roost site, at the tree they're roosting in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So you can only imagine the scenario where this bird is waking up from the night. It's mostly toms, but we do lose hens to horned owls as well. This bird's waking up, they're shuffling around, they're moving about in the tree a little bit, and unbeknownst to them, 50 yards away, there's a great horned owl sitting there that's been observing what's going on around the area, sees this activity, senses it, hones in on it, gets a little closer, figures out, the playing field, flies in silently, hits this bird in the tree. And what we see them do is they hit the bird, and they grab the bird with their feet, and they carry the bird to the ground. So you can actually see where the feather trail starts at the roost tree, and there's going to be a plume like a trail of feathers away from the tree to where the carcass is found. And they're killing the bird as they're going to the ground, and they'll usually, not always, but they'll usually remove the head once they get the bird on the ground. So when we find the carcass, it doesn't have a head anymore. And they'll eat part of the meat, and then they'll leave. And, if you think about it from a turkey's perspective, that's a hard predator to deal with.
Defend against.
Yeah, you have no idea they're there. I mean, at least, when they're on the ground and they've got that periscope out and they're looking around and they see this sudden ambush coming, they can react to it. It may not work out for them, but they can. A horned owl, they're not reacting to that. They're getting smoked.
I mean, I always think about like how much more respectful human beings would be to the world if we had a predator like that.
Yeah,
Kept us on our toes. It's
yeah.
just like we're
Like
just
the movie,
walking around.
like the movie Predator. Yeah,
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 exactly. Yeah, we
yeah.
wouldn't walk around like lords of the land. A couple more questions for you. Do you have any piece of advice you think would generally make a person a better turkey hunter if they could really take it on?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Uh, this is speaking personally. What has helped me through time is just being more patient, being willing to sit, listen, not be in such a hurry, understand that this bird sometimes for reasons we'll never know flies down out of the tree and you're not part of the equation at that point.
Yeah.
He doesn't care what you say, how you say it, how sexy you sound. He's going somewhere else because he has an agenda and you're not part of it. If you're patient, sometimes, not always, but sometimes you can become part of that agenda 3 hours later. So I personally have gotten to be a better turkey hunter through time just by being willing to slow down a little bit and be more patient, be more willing to just sit and let things evolve, let a bird that meanders off and, instead of getting frustrated and chasing after him and potentially, bumping him, just kind of trailing him, if you will. Hey, I'm going to, I'm going to kind of keep tabs on him and just see where he goes, see how maybe he'll, strike it back up later in the morning. And a lot of times it doesn't work out. But when it does, it makes you realize that if you had just packed up and gone to the truck, you wouldn't have killed that bird.
Mhm.
So that to me is just kind of slowing down and being willing to be more patient.
That's great advice because I find myself just this desire to run and gun. It's like such
Me
a
too.
busy life. So
Yeah.
that's good input.
Man, I need to go get him so I can, man, I got to be at work here,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What about if you had a magic wand you could wave and make big changes to, or any changes in the conservation world regarding turkeys? Is there anything that you'd like to see happen, or if you could sort of enact in a big picture way, if you had that power? Is there something you would do to, for the perpetuity of turkeys and turkey hunting?
Yeah, there's a lot. One thing I'd love to see would be kind of a collective effort to do a better job at impacting private lands for turkeys
Mm.
because the agencies get beat up so bad, yet agencies control such little acreage.
So landowners actually
Yeah, most
creating
turkeys live
habitat.
on private land, and particularly in the east. And we, as a scientific community, we we do a good job at collecting the science, and we do a poor job at telling people what it means and why it's important. And I'd really love to see a better effort at taking what we know and making it relevant to private landowners, explaining how to implement the things we know will help turkeys, and then figuring out if I could, the magic wand analogy, I would I'd just strike that wand and make turkeys more relevant to the general public than they are. A lot of people don't realize that. I was just talking with somebody yesterday about this. Ironically, they said the turkeys are a generalist species, meaning like a deer, they can live in
Hmm.
a lot of different places. Yeah, well, yeah, to some degree, but when it comes to the plant communities, they're the vegetation communities they're adapted to living in. They are quite specific at certain times of the year, and that is when they're reproducing. And given that we're seeing these declines in reproduction, it leads me to believe there's something going on there, and we know there is, that the habitat that's out there is not the quality in a lot of cases that the bird needs.
Right.
I would like to see a way to prioritize the types of places turkeys thrive in, and be able to explain to people, here's an example of where turkeys are doing really well. This is what it looks like. This is what it took to create that. Now, would you be willing to do the same? And if not, how could I incentivize you to do that?
Maybe I could have you back on sometime to talk more about that topic because, as a landowner, I'd love to do something to encourage. I only see turkeys a few times a year on my land. I'm mostly hemlock forest. It's not really great habitat for them, but I'd love to make some changes there that would encourage. So maybe that's something we could talk about in the future, because I think a lot of people who listen to this show, particularly, a lot of them are into permaculture and, small scale home agriculture stuff, and would be willing to do that kind of work. So that could be really interesting. And then I wanted to ask you, sort of in closing, about, I'm sort of mentioning this in the beginning. I feel like the average hunter, and most of the people listening to this show are fairly new to hunting, or come to hunting from a really kind of a different perspective, an alternative perspective, than most of the sportsman's community. So I guess one question I have is, like, do you have recommendations on how to access, for the layperson, the scientific data in a way that would help their hunting? Because it does feel like there's these two silos. There's like the hunting world, and then there's the field biology world, and those things don't always crisscross enough. So do you think, like, are there articles that reading would like make you a better hunter? Is there a way to access that kind of data for the layperson that you recommend?
It's funny you asked me that. There currently is not. I am actually in the last final stages of creating a website that will include it basically will be a clearinghouse of everything that I've ever done, but it will also include information from other turkey science, if you will, with very specific layman descriptions of this is what this means. So for instance, here's a link to an article that I published 10 years ago. Here's literally in 4 sentences what we found and why you should care.
Right.
And I'm hoping that clearinghouse will, not for every instance, but in a lot of cases, will allow people that have no link to the scientific world. They're a turkey hunter and they want to understand, they're interested in the science, but they need to be able to read it and digest it in a way where it makes sense. And people like me, academics get caught up in a lot of cases talking to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
We talk to ourselves, and we fail to realize that most people in society can't relate to what we're doing or saying. And we need to do a better job at articulating to people why what we're doing is important, and to your point, how could this benefit me, whether it's a hunter, a landowner, whatever. And that's what I hope I'm going to be able to do through this content on the site is start bridging that gap a little, at least to some degree, offering people a one-stop shop where they can go, they can see what the science, if they're really interested in delving into the science, they can, but at least they get a teaser for, this is really the take home of this. This is what we found. And if you're a turkey hunter, this tells you that this bird travels this far in a day. If you own X number of acres, you're sharing birds with this number of neighbors. Whatever the topic may be, it will allow people to kind of grab a little piece of information and then be able to think about it on their own and apply it to their own situations. That's what I'm hoping we can accomplish.
Oh man, any kind of timeline on that?
February.
Oh wow. Cool.
Yeah, February.
Right.
We're gonna try to launch in February. So
great.
It's a work in progress, but we're getting there.
In the meantime, I mentioned to folks before about your Wild Turkey Doc. Instagram is just an awesome resource, but also your website, wildturkeylab.com. Is that you?
It is. Yep. That's the website that we're developing. It's just a skeleton right now.
Oh, okay. There's quite a lot of content on there, I gotta say.
Yeah, it's just a skeleton right now.
Okay.
That's just a placeholder.
Cool. Well, yeah. Anywhere else you want to send people in the meantime?
Actually, yeah. I mean, my Instagram page, I put a lot of information on there. I put the same content on Facebook. If you're interested in in turkey and turkey hunting, there's some other resources on both Facebook and Instagram that are, that post content, about hunting and conservation and science. Yeah, I mean, I post a lot, as you know, I post every week, and I try to put content out there that I think people will be interested in, and that is timely. If we're talking about fall, winter behaviors, and I'll try to put content out there that I think will resonate with people at the time of year that they see it. And if you're interested in turkeys, I would just say, let that interest be year round. Don't just be an active participant once deer season ends in the winter. Be interested in turkeys all year, and because there are people like me that are putting out content all year, hoping that interest will kind of not wane, that it will remain strong all year.
Well said, man. And with almost 50,000 followers on your Instagram, for how specific of an account this is, it's pretty impressive that you got the interest and ear of a lot of turkey hunters, man. Pretty amazing. Thank you so much for your time today. I feel like I've been really trying to find somebody who's a real authority on the topic, and it just feels good to talk to somebody who's as immersed in both the science and the hunt. So this has been really insightful for me. I hope we get you back on sometime and go a little deeper. So
yeah, sure. I'd be glad to join you anytime.
Thanks for listening to the WildFed podcast. You can help us grow this show by subscribing and leaving us a rating and review. It ensures better rankings and more advertiser interest, which translates directly into better shows, more awesome guests, and a constant stream of fresh new content. Have a podcast guest or topic suggestion, or maybe a hunting, fishing, or foraging trip you'd like to host the WildFed TV show for? Email us at info@wild-fed.com. If you still haven't seen season 1 or 2 of the WildFed TV show, go to myoutdoortv.com, grab yourself a free trial subscription, and then check out all 20 episodes. Season 3 of WildFed premieres on Outdoor Channel in early 2023. And be sure to visit our website, wild-fed.com, to check out our store for WildFed shirts, hoodies, hats, stickers, and more. WildFed. Food is all around you.